Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest operation from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. It is good to be back with you after a bit of a launch hiatus, and we've got a slightly different activity on tap for you today. My name is, of course, Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to be back with you for a live stream here at NASA's multi-user spaceport. As you can see here on the center of your screen, emerging from the Pegasus barge is the core stage for NASA's Space Launch System rocket, the engine section of a 212-foot long core stage for a rocket taller than the Statue of Liberty is just beginning to emerge from a barge that took about a week to make its journey from Louisiana all the way down here to Florida's Space Coast. You see a lot of folks in yellow vests just beneath it. This is not going to be a quick process. This is a very key, you might even say, core part of NASA's vehicle that will carry the first quartet of astronauts on their way to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis program, a successor, of course, to the Apollo program from back in the 60s into the early 70s. NASA astronauts Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen will be the first to take the Orion spacecraft on an 8-day journey around the moon and back with a splashdown off the coast of Southern California near San Diego. The Artemis 2 mission is scheduled to launch no earlier than September of 2025, about a year delay from its previous launch date. Was at one point in time looking to lift off in the latter half of this year. However, back in January, NASA made the decision to pivot because they needed more time to complete some checkouts and do some additional testing, in part on the Orion heat shield, which we'll get into a little bit more as we continue on with our broadcast. We are joined by our core folks here today. Our photographers, Adam Bernstein, and I believe Michael Kane will be joining us in a little bit as well. We've got several different views, several different angles on this core stage as we're seeing it now emerge. Give you a sense of scale here. On the bottom right-hand corner, of course, is the Pegasus barge. We can see the aft end of the core stage starting to emerge from that Pegasus barge. Its destination is that big building behind it, the Vehicle Assembly Building, or the VAB, where starting next month, we should start to see the stacking of the vehicle, beginning with the mobile launcher, which will go to this wider shot here from the roof of the OSB-2 building. You can see basically in the dead center of your screen, just cresting over the horizon, a little bit obscured because the sun is kind of washing things out, but you can see that little bit that's poking up just beyond the tree line. That is the mobile launcher, or the ML, that is undergoing a series of tests and checkouts to make sure that it is safe and suitable for not only the crew of the Artemis 2 mission, but also, of course, all of the support personnel that will be helping the astronauts safely ingress into the vehicle. Should there be an emergency, they're also performing some checkouts on the emergency egress system. Basically, think of a fancy slide wire basket system that, in the event that there were to be an emergency before the vehicle was fully loaded and the emergency escape system on the Orion spacecraft was armed, that'd be a way for them to make a fairly quick movement away from the mobile launcher. Want to welcome everyone joining us this morning. It's been a while since we've had a a live stream. Of course, the Falcon 9 rocket has been standing down due to a second stage anomaly, but we'll be hopefully back with live launch coverage in the not too distant future. As a matter of fact, SpaceX is poised for a static fire test of its Falcon 9 rocket over at Pad 40 for Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It was looking like it was going to be overnight in the early pre-dawn hours of this morning. However, SpaceX did not bring the Falcon 9 rocket into a vertical position until a little bit too late to make that happen. But as you can see here, I'll pop away from the SLS for just a moment. You can see the Falcon 9 upright at Pad 40. So we are anticipating that static fire test in the not too distant future. Of course, be sure to keep tabs on our social media, and we'll let you know the more specific hour as we learn it. We are, of course, powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube, so thanks to folks like Raleigh Nevels, Jason Sphinx, John Torrance, Zeus's Mommy, and many others. Sandra Morin. No, Callistia Lee was in here a little bit earlier for your support. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and, of course, the ability to watch all the live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Also, if you have a comment or question about the operation happening today or about other happenings going on in the realm of space, you can go ahead and use that YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will you be helping support what we do here at Spaceflight Now, which will give us some interesting things to talk about as we continue to track the progress of the SLS rocket, the core stage. Taking a look at this wider vantage point here, thank you, Stephen, our editor, Stephen Young, of course, for Spaceflight Now. The SLS core stage will take that winding path that you can see there on the right-hand side of the screen. It will skirt around the entrance of the press site here. Our office is just a little bit off-screen from this vantage point. You're looking at the parking lot of the OSB-2 building there in front of you where all those cars are parked. The core stage will make a fairly short road trip, especially compared to the long sea voyage it just had, and go. You can see where that red car is making a U-turn. It will continue on past that security gate on the left-hand side of your screen, and then finally make its way on into the vehicle assembly building. Building touted as the largest single-story building in the country, if not the world. We're coming up on quarter past the hour here on the East Coast. About 13:12 UTC for our friends joining us around the world. If you're just popping into our live coverage, you are watching the transport of NASA's SLS core stage, slowly and methodically making its way to the vehicle assembly building, part of the assembly process of NASA's Space Launch System rocket. This core stage manufactured, you might be able to see from the labels there near the aft skirt, but the core stage manufactured principally by Boeing. They are the prime contractor for this stage of the rocket. Those 4 RS-25 engines are manufactured by a company called Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is headquartered actually in my hometown of Sacramento, California. They were acquired by L3Harris, so now Aerojet Rocketdyne is typically referred to as Aerojet Rocketdyne and L3Harris Company. L3Harris, of course, headquartered right here on the Space Coast. And if you're thinking back and pondering, well, I remember the RS-25 engine. That was used on the space shuttle, right? Well, you would be correct. And in fact, a number of the engines through the first few missions of the Artemis program are refurbished engines from the shuttle era. We're now properly quarter past the hour here on the East Coast. Talking a little bit more about those RS-25 engines. Going around the horn in sort of a counterclockwise way, they each have a specific number designation. So the bottom left that you see here on your screen in this live picture, that is engine number 1. To its right is number 2. The top right is number 3. And the top left is number 4. They each also have a different serial number. Number 1 is E2047. Engine 2 is E2059. Engine number 3 is E2062. And finally, engine number 4 is E2063. As I mentioned, Aerojet Rocketdyne using some shuttle engines that have been refurbished and improved for the use of the Space Launch System rocket. Engine number 1, E2047, happens to have flown 15 times, with its first flight happening back in June 1998 on STS-91. Its last flight was actually the final Space Shuttle mission STS-135 in July of 2011. That particular engine was also used during STS-98, which delivered the Destiny Laboratory module to the International Space Station back in 2001. Engine number 2, again in the bottom right position, That was part of 5 shuttle flights, including STS-125, which was the last Hubble servicing mission. And while engines 3 and 4 harken back to the space shuttle era, those were actually never flown. So they'll be flying for their first and only time on the Artemis 2 mission, as NASA is not recovering the RS-25 engines this go around. However, they do include some pieces of previously flown hardware, so they're not 100% brand new RS-25 engines. Taking a look at our live chat here. First off, I want to thank the a little more than 400 folks who are joining us live on a Wednesday morning. I know it is, of course, a work day, and depending on where you're joining us in the world, may not be the most convenient time in the work opportunity to join us for a live stream, but appreciate those who are with us. If you haven't already, the kind way to help us out in attracting more live folks is by hitting the like button. We'll let the YouTube algorithm do its thing to bring more live viewers to this for those who are able to join this morning. Debbie Sunset asking if the core stage is going to fit into the VAB. We'll show you this vantage point again. Now, while the VAB is not currently configured for this, and certainly the timeline and the flow of the Artemis missions does not demand it, you could conceivably have up to 4 SLS rockets in each of the high bays around the VAB. Again, that will not be necessary for this mission, and they'll just use high bay 3 for stacking operations for the Artemis 2 mission. But yes, there is more than enough space for this vehicle, and then some. In fact, I believe it was a little over a year ago now, maybe a year and a half at this point, that NASA put out some feelers for the commercial use of High Bay 1 here at the VAB. There's been some speculation on who may have acquired that, but so far they have not executed that lease agreement, and so until that happens, NASA is choosing to remain mum on that issue. That is more in the hands of the commercial partner to decide if they want to publicly disclose that at this point in time. Taking a look back at this vantage point, you can see actually just in the far upper right-hand corner of the screen here, the top of the mobile launcher that I was talking about just a little bit ago. And in the very top, I believe from this point of view, you can actually see the crew access arm, which is fairly similar to other crew access arms for other crewed vehicles, which is the ones we've seen over at pads 39A pad 40, and of course over at pad 41. That'll be the access point for the Artemis 2 astronauts once this rocket is out of the pad and there's an Orion spacecraft on top. We're now approaching the bottom of the hour here as we're tracking the progress of NASA's SLS core stage, manufactured principally by the prime contractor Boeing, down at the Michoud assembly facility in Louisiana. Of course, the first core stage was put through a series of tests culminating in what was called the Green Run, where they brought that core stage up to the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi and did a hot fire test of all of 4 of the RS-25 engines on that vehicle. Subsequently, they've, of course, done qualification tests on each of the successive RS-25 engines that will fly for future Artemis missions, including the 4 that you see here mated to the aft end, or the base of the core stage. Around the core there will be 2 solid rocket boosters, which also have some shuttle heritage to them. Those will be stacked in the VAB first once the mobile launcher, which you see there in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, is moved back to the vehicle assembly building. Yesterday we had the opportunity to go to a facility where NASA is actually doing some of the testing and prep work for the boosters. It's called the Rotation, Processing, and Surge Facility here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, shortened down to the RPSF. Inside, we were able to speak with a few different folks, including the mission manager for this particular mission. So here's part of our conversation with the Artemis II mission manager, Matthew Ramsey, named shortly after the Artemis I mission wrapped up. Here's part of our conversation in which he talked about what's coming up next in the successive weeks and months for the Artemis II campaign.
We're going through the final testing of the mobile launcher out there. It has sustained some damage from Artemis 1 that we fixed, and now we're testing the crew systems out there, so the emergency egress system, the slide wire baskets. We're coming to an end of the testing of that, and the crew access arm, which gets the crew in and out. That testing will wrap up towards the end of next month. We'll get the mobile launcher back here in the VAB. Then we'll start doing stacking of the boosters. We'll stack the aft skirts on with the aft assemblies, and then we'll go right, left, all the way up, 5 segments on each side, and then put the core in and start doing integrated testing of that. And then eventually we'll get the upper stage in, do testing there, and then Orion spacecraft. A lot of testing between now and September next year.
And again, that was Artemis II mission manager Matthew Ramsey. We'll have more of our conversation with him a little bit later on as our live coverage of the core stage move continues, tracking here live for you near the press site of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Again, this is a slow, methodical process as they've been working on this core stage for quite some time and want to make sure it's transported safely. What you will not likely see in any of the live pictures here, especially looking at some of the crew that is as close to the core stage as possible, are a lot of cell phones or smartwatches, as RF devices are prohibited within a certain distance of the rocket. In fact, folks here at the Kennedy Space Center have created a quite wide berth between basically non-NASA personnel or non-Jacobs personnel. Jacobs is the prime contractor for the Exploration Ground Systems program, the essentially boots on the ground that do a lot of the final processing and integration of the various large components of the SLS rocket. They're the ones who are permitted within this about 600-foot perimeter around the core stage. But any radio frequency transmitting devices are a big no-no, so likely won't see folks taking selfies or anything like that close up to the core stage as it makes its move. Now coming up on about 9:40 here on the East Coast. Right now you're taking a look at the engine section and one of the bottom pieces of the liquid hydrogen tank that's peeking out of the Pegasus barge at the moment. The hydrogen tank consists of 5 barrels, 2 rings, and 2 domes. Then there's an inner tank separating the liquid hydrogen tank from the liquid oxygen tank, which is up top, the furthest inside the Pegasus barge at this particular moment in time. That liquid oxygen or a LOX tank consists of 2 barrel sections, 2 rings, and 2 domes, topped with a forward skirt. Sitting on top of the core stage, of course, will be the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which is provided by United Launch Alliance. All 3 of the SLS ICPSs have been manufactured by ULA. They've been delivered here and are currently in Florida. So ULA's part of the Space Launch System program is essentially wrapped up since they've made their deliveries. You can see the core stage now beginning to move again. Looks like the folks at Jacobs are satisfied with where things have got to at this point, so we'll see about how far they take it out this time. It's fair to anticipate a number of starts and stops as they continue with this operation here. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're actually going to be joined for a live interview with a very special guest. We're going to be speaking with Mr. John Honeycutt, who is the Space Launch System Program Manager for NASA. Does the lion's share of his work up at the Marshall Space Flight Center in the Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama. So we'll be talking with him, of course, about what we're witnessing live right here, the rolling out of the SLS core stage. We'll talk to him, of course, as well about what has been happening over at Michoud, where this core stage was assembled, and the campaign from here, and a little bit into Artemis yet to come. So stand by. If you haven't already, be sure to click that like button to allow some more folks to find their way into our live launch coverage. And we'll be back with commentary in just a few moments as we are joined by Mr. John Honeycutt. Hello there, welcome back to our live coverage of the core stage rollout for NASA's Space Launch System rocket. You're joining us here at Spaceflight Now. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter, and as you can see next to me, we are joined by a very special guest. He is the program manager for the Space Launch System rocket. This is Mr. John Honeycutt. Does most of his work up in Huntsville, Alabama, the top of the state, the Rocket City for those who know it, and we're very happy to have him join us this afternoon, or I guess still morning. John, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always good to see you, and of course you've been very busy, you know, now with the core stage coming out behind us.
Yeah.
You know, from the progress that you're tracking so far, how would you assess how the morning's going?
I think everything's moving along just according to schedule. It's going to be great to see that core stage get into the VAB.
Absolutely. And so, you know, as we've told folks this morning, you know, the assembly of the core stage, which is principally done by Boeing, happens at the Michoud assembly facility down in Louisiana, which is overseen by Marshall. You know, I was last there back in 2019. I'm sure, you know, a lot has changed since that time. For those who have not been able to visit there, kind of bring us inside what's been happening in preparation for this core stage to be shipped out here and what's currently happening right now.
Yeah, so we got a lot of work going on in the factory, as you see core stage 2 rolling out of the barge now, but still there's work going on for Artemis 3, 4, and 5 at Michoud. You are right, we've done a lot of things to kind of update the Michoud assembly facility to make it more employee friendly. Things like new lights, new facilities, things like that. So I'm impressed with the team and the work that they're doing.
You know, in the time since the first Artemis 1 launch, obviously there's been copious amounts of time to pour through the data, really get a sense of how that rocket performed and translate that to this mission. What were some of the key takeaways that you and your team learned from Artemis 1?
Yeah, so the performance overall, I would still say was an A+. We did learn some things on Artemis 1 that we've had to make some, what I would call adjustments for. We've worked some few challenges that we had relative to our thermal protection system, which most folks look at the stage and see it as spray-on foam insulation. So we've done a lot of work to understand why we lost some of the foam that we did on Artemis 1. I will say none of it was unexpected. But we want to make it better and improve our risk posture for Artemis 2, especially since we're flying crew on it.
And so can you dig a little bit more into that? What were some of the things that popped out for you from that analysis?
Are you talking relative to the TPS or just TPS?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Artemis 1 and core stage 1 in particular was kind of unique, right? If you recall, we had multiple attempts at the green run. We finally were successful with the green run, and then, you know, at the end of the day, we shipped down here to KSC. The entire team had a lot of learning to do relative to how to load the launch vehicle. So it's, you know, we know that the number of cryo cycles that you put on those large structures with the TPS on them does put a lot of wear on them, right? So it's kind of not unexpected, but we've done some things relative to things like minimizing the thickness in the areas of concern while we still maintain the thermal performance. And we're finishing up a few tests back at Marshall where we're maybe heading towards putting some little vent holes in the TPS to minimize the size of the foam that pops off. We got a team of people that did a lot of work, including myself, for return to flight after the Columbia accident, which, you know, that big piece of TPS was responsible for that. But we've taken all those lessons learned. We've done a lot of full-scale subsystem level tests. Got a really good understanding of what we're going to see.
You know, you mentioned a couple of different times you loaded and detanked the vehicle, and, you know, kind of fell into a rhythm by the last time as you were preparing to launch. Do you feel like from the lessons learned through that you've got a good fueling system now that, barring other unforeseen circumstances, that won't be an impediment to launch next time, that the hydrogen leak issue may not crop up again?
I'm confident in the loading process that we got to at the end of the day, and we're successful in launching Artemis 1. The hydrogen molecule is highly energetic. That's why we use it. It's the most energetic molecule we've got. But it's also very small. Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't stand here today and tell you that we won't see a leak. But I think we've put ourselves in the best posture we can to minimize any of those events and understand more about the hardware and the configuration that we're in.
And, penultimate question, because I know there's a lot of other folks that want to talk to you today. In the next few weeks and months, leading up to, through the stacking process and validating the vehicle, give us sort of an overview of what that timeline looks for your team's perspective for the Artemis 2 mission.
Yes, really this is kind of it's a handoff today to the EGS folks, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a partnership, but they're also leading the effort, right? And so our team works closely with them to make sure that we're part of their planning for any of the work that we need to do on the vehicle once it gets into the VAB. That said, core stage is here, it's ready, and all the other elements of the SLS program are ready to support a September 2025 launch attempt.
So then does your focus sort of split off to, now that you've, we saw some photos on social media of a literal baton being passed from one team to the other.
Yeah.
Does your focus kind of shift now in some significant part to Artemis 3, or are you still kind of all in on Artemis 2 until that rocket goes?
Well, until we successfully fly Artemis 2, my top priority will be Artemis 2, followed somewhat closely by Artemis 3 and then Artemis 4. But we're getting into the season of what we call flight readiness, right? And so we want to continue to work through that process to make sure that we understand everything that we need to know about the vehicle. Obviously, we're flying crew on it the first time. We got Reid, Victor, Jeremy, and Christina, which have been a pleasure to get to know over the last year or so. I've known some of them even longer than that, but they've been they've come inside the program and participated in some of our work that we're doing leading up to flight readiness.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you launch them a little bit later, about a year from now. So, Mr. Honeycutt, thank you so much for your time, sir. Always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Likewise. And of course, we have much more coverage, as we continue to track the progress of the core stage you see behind us. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here with much more here on Spaceflight Now. And welcome back to our continuing coverage here at Spaceflight Now of the rollout of the Space Launch System rocket's core stage. You can see there it's making some excellent progress coming out of the Pegasus barge after making about a weeks-long journey from Louisiana down here to Florida Space Coast. We just had a wonderful conversation with John Honeycutt, and as you can see, I'm joined now by another wonderful guest. This is Sean Quinn with the Exploration Ground Systems program, the part of NASA that is based here at the Kennedy Space Center that's really overseeing a lot of the movements we're going to be seeing with the Space Launch System rocket, moving all of the key components into the vehicle assembly building and making the rocket that we saw launch on the Artemis 1 mission, doing it again, but this time with crew. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And so, you know, taking a look behind us, we can see the majority of the core stage now has come out of the Pegasus barge. By your sort of tracking of what you expected to see this morning, what we are seeing, how's the morning going from your estimation?
The morning's going very well. Things are on track, and we will get the core stage over to the vehicle assembly building today, and it'll be another major step towards launching Artemis 2.
And, you know, NASA was gracious enough to bring some of us over to the facility where they're processing the solid rocket boosters. We've got a wonderful model here, and so we saw the aft section that was stacked up in the main facility there. A couple of the pieces with the, I think this model actually does not have it, but the NASA worm that's on the sides here.
That's right.
So if you can kind of walk us through the next steps for the solids on the side as it sort of comes into concert with the core stage.
Yep, so as you mentioned, today we're taking delivery of the core stage for Artemis 2. So we'll take the core stage over to the vehicle assembly building, park it in the transfer aisle. There we will hook up environmental control system purges. We will install linear shaped charges, do a little bit of work on the thermal protection system, and weigh it. And by weighing it, we'll have a better understanding of what the mass properties are, and then it'll be used to help inform the flight dynamics people for the SLS. At the same time, we have completed offline processing of the solid rocket booster segments. There's 5 of them for the Space Launch System, and they are currently over in the rotation processing and surge facility not far from here. And once we get done with the mobile launcher at the pad, we'll bring the mobile launcher back, and we will begin stacking the solid rocket booster segments. We'll start with the aft segment, and we'll do both of them at the same time, and we'll put the aft segments in, and then we'll stack the center sections, eventually making it all the way up to the top to complete the solid rocket booster assembly process. And after that, we will lift the core stage from the transfer aisle into the vehicle assembly building, lower it very precisely between the solid rocket boosters, and eventually put the launch vehicle stage adapter on, the ICPS, and finally the Orion spacecraft. It's going to be an exciting time over the next year here at the Kennedy Space Center.
And so for those next key steps of stacking with the solids and then with the core stage, can you give us a sense of a timeline of when you're expecting some of those milestones to be checked off?
Yeah, so we will spend, I'm going to guess, around 8 weeks in the transfer aisle with the core stage doing the work. And that may ebb and flow as we understand some additional work we may have to do. And then we'll start stacking the solid rocket boosters in the fall. That will take about 10 weeks. So hopefully by the end of the fall, early winter, we'll be mating the core stage with the solid rocket boosters, and we'll complete that stacking process and eventually take the vehicle out to the pad for either a tanking test or a wet dress rehearsal.
And as we've been watching, there's been quite a bit of activity out at Pad 39B between swing arm tests of the crew access arm, the deluge system, the slide wire baskets. Can you talk about sort of the final about a month or so of work that's left to do out there?
So we have had the mobile launcher out at the Launch Complex 39B for just several months now. And we're doing several things, including testing our new emergency egress system. It's a slide wire basket system similar to shuttle. A little, the mobile launcher tower is much taller than what we had for shuttle. And so we're sliding those emergency egress baskets down to the terminus, and eventually we'll bring the crews out here. We'll practice egress training with the crew. And once that's complete, we'll roll the mobile launcher back to the vehicle assembly building and get on with the stacking process. One thing I didn't mention is, like you said, we were also doing a lot of work with the crew access arm. We've modified the control system for it. We've modified some of the hydraulic systems for it to get ready for Artemis 2.
And I know there's a number of folks that want to talk to you, so this will be one of my last questions, but you know, in the flow of the Artemis 1 mission, obviously that was really the first time that EGS was working with that rocket and going through all the process that you needed to. What were some of the key takeaways from going through that flow that you helped work into Artemis 2 to maybe simplify things?
Well, I will tell you that the first flow of any launch vehicle is going to be the hardest one. You know, for many folks, this is the first time that they have processed solid rocket booster segments, or definitely the first time for the core stage. So we came up with a number of lessons learned following Artemis 1, and we've applied those lessons learned to inform our processing steps and things that we're doing for Artemis 2. So there's a ton of learning that occurred. We had literally dozens and dozens of things that we recorded and said, hey, we got to do this a little different. We got to be a little bit more efficient, and we're applying those as we speak. It's already seen benefits.
And lastly, before we let you go, you know, when we were over at the RCPS, you know, we got to see a little bit of the work being done. Actually, you can see there in the distance there on the ML2, which will be used starting in Artemis 4 and beyond. You can give us some insight into how that work is going and, you know, if it's getting a little bit closer to its new timeline of development and finishing up.
So work on the Mobile Launcher 2 is going very, very well right now. We just completed an important milestone called Jack and Set. So we're doing most of the Mobile Launcher base construction at ground level because it's easier to do construction at that point. And all the major trusses have been welded together, bolted together, and then on May 9th we brought the crawler transporter in and we lifted up the Mobile Launcher 2 base and set it on what we call the mount mechanisms. So it's in its location where we're going to do the final construction. And our contractor Bechtel's doing a great job with construction right now, and we're taking delivery of more steel, more ground support equipment, and we're getting ready to do installs. Down at the near the headquarters building, we're actually building the tower sections. And the primary structure for those tower sections is nearly complete. And then later this fall, early winter, we'll start bringing those tower sections over to the park site and start building this huge new Mobile Launcher 2 that will be used for Space Launch System Block 1B.
And how many tower sections are going to be stacked?
Ooh, I'm going to say 4, maybe, but
we'll double check later.
We'll have to do a fact check on that. Yep.
Well, Sean Quinn, thank you so much for your time, sir. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure talking to you. Great. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And of course, as you can see, the core stage is still moseying on out of the Pegasus barge, so we're going to have a lot more coverage for you. So stay right here with Spaceflight Now. We'll be back with more commentary in just a little bit. We're now currently about 20 past 10 here on the East Coast. As you can see here on the screen, the core stage of the SLS rocket has made it all the way out of the Pegasus barge. Again, this is just the second time that a core stage has been delivered here to NASA's Kennedy Space Center. First, of course, being the SLS rocket used on the Artemis 1 mission. I want to thank NASA's John Honeycutt and Sean Quinn, the Space Launch System Program Manager and Exploration Ground Systems Program Manager, respectively, for joining us. It was a great conversation, and we were very interested to learn along with you great insight about the progress of the vehicle, some of the work yet to come. (10:21) here on the East Coast. You can see the core stage now back on the move. Taking a look here from the OSB-2 building, you can see a good overview of the path that the rocket will take. Now that it's fully outside of the Pegasus barge, things will likely pick up a little bit more here, a little bit of wind shake. Actually, let's go back to this view for just a second here. You can see traffic still flowing out to the pads here and, of course, over to the vehicle assembly building. That will, of course, be halted once the core stage is much closer to needing to cross the road. You want to give a wide buffer to the vehicle. our thanks to our photographer, Adam Bernstein, for nailing this shot right here. As we were talking with Sean Quinn about the Mobile Launcher 2 at the end of our conversation, you're seeing that right here at the heart of your screen. Those red cranes and yellow cranes in the distance constructing what will be a larger mobile launcher known as ML2, which is being designed in order to support the Artemis, or excuse me, the Space Launch System rocket Block 1B, which will be a taller version of the SLS vehicle needed to support the version of the SLS that will use the Exploration Upper Stage manufactured by Boeing, as opposed to the currently used Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage. So a taller rocket obviously needs a taller support structure, and that's what's being manufactured just behind the Artemis 2 SLS core stage. You can see those components sandwiched in between the RS-25 engines from this vantage point. Coming up on the bottom of the hour, we're going to be joined by another guest, the head of the Artemis 2 program, the mission manager, Mr. Matthew Ramsey. We'll be joining with him live in just a moment, so sit tight. We'll bring that coverage to you momentarily. talk on tower. And we're back with our live coverage of the rollout of the core stage for the Artemis 2 mission. It has been a busy morning for the Exploration Ground Systems teams as they've been rolling that core stage. Made a lot of progress since we started our live stream at 9 this morning, and we've been very graciously joined by some wonderful guests. Got another one for you here. This is Mr. Matthew Ramsey, the mission manager for the Artemis 2 mission. So really the head honcho over this flight. Sir, it's good to have you join us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Fantastic backdrop, huh?
Absolutely. And so, you know, got a little more traction on it since the last time we were live outside looking at it. Are things progressing about on schedule?
Yeah, I think they're on schedule. Yeah.
Excellent.
We've got some leeway to get it into the barn, so I think we're doing pretty good on the move schedule.
Perfect. And I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but obviously there's a lot of different chess pieces on the board to get ready for the Artemis 2 mission.
Yep.
From a mission management level, you know, how are you kind of seeing this whole process right now? If you can sort of give us your perspective on where we are
sure.
in the Artemis 2.
So we've moved all the, like you said, we moved all the chess pieces around. We still have a couple of adapters at Marshall Space Flight Center. That's not really anything in the critical path. Really what we're doing here, the core stage really kind of starts the clock for us for getting the work done on it that was either transferred from Michoud or the known work that we had to do here in the transfer aisle. The mobile launcher will come in at the end of next month, and then we'll start stacking boosters and go from there. So that's kind of what's going through my head, is get all the puzzle pieces not only near the board but on the board where you need them to make the next step. So.
And you were telling me yesterday that you came on as the mission manager pretty close to right about the end of the Artemis 1 mission.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You know, what was it like in those early days, you know, sort of getting that campaign really on its feet once you stepped into your role?
Yeah, we were actually doing that while Artemis 1 was still flying. So, you know, once, you know, it was a 28-day mission, we really started with the mission integration review, which basically locks down all your mission requirements, how many crew you're flying, you know, what type of mission are you looking at, 10 days, 15 days, whatever. We locked all that down last March, and we've been working towards verifying that the mission closes and that we're in good shape there, and we are. So.
And just talking about the mission timeline, it's nominally 8 days. You know, if for whatever reason, you know, the mission needs to be extended, about what are the sort of outward margins that it could go out to, or for some reason when you do those sort of initial checkouts of Orion, you know, with Victor and Reid, you know, what's the sort of, if you need to bring it to a close a little bit earlier, what does that kind of look like? Yeah,
so the mission is a 10-day mission. 1 day will be spent in low Earth orbit or high Earth orbit, checking out the crew systems, the ECLS, putting heavy bioload into the ECLS systems like the CO2 scrubbers, and that's environmental control and life support. Putting heavy bioload into it, making sure the scrubbers are working, make sure all the subsystems are working that have to be working, and then we do the translunar injection to the moon. So after a day of checkout, and then we give it a go to go there. At any point, if we have any issues, we do have the abort capability to come back in. If we have issues during the 1 day mission or the 1 day orbit, we can come back in early if we need to. And we can also, we have propellant on board to be able to get us back if we have to abort before we get to the moon. At some points, it's better just to fly around the moon and come back for an abort. But yeah, it'll be around 10 days. We'll have extra consumables on board, probably not more than a day or two. So that's really kind of what we're looking at there.
Gotcha. So if the weather's not looking ideal for a splashdown off the Pacific, you've got about a couple days margin to sort of maneuver around that, sounds like?
We'll come back. We'll come back on the allotted time there. We won't do an abort for weather. We do have a off of the coast of San Diego. We've got a box to hit to get into that, and we do have some additional flexibility to come in short before we hit the box at San Diego at Fleet of Hot. But we'll make that decision a day or so before we come back in.
Gotcha. And you mentioned yesterday that the independent team's analysis on the Orion heat shield is about to wrap up in about a week or so.
That's right.
Now, right?
Yeah, I think the independent team is done. They're just out briefing to the Orion program, and then next week will be the out brief to the Enterprise. So,
from the sort of initial assessments, or at this stage, what are you kind of expecting that report to include?
I don't want to get in front of the team out briefing. So, and a decision is going to have to be made. They're not going to just bring, one answer. They're going to bring some option, an answer, and some options probably. So that would be my guess. But I don't feel comfortable getting in front of them yet. So,
of course.
Yeah.
And just one of my last questions, because I know there's a lot of folks that want to talk to you today. Being that this is the first crew demonstration of the Orion spacecraft, there's a lot to learn, and we just saw crew flight test of the Boeing Starliner happening right now. What are some of the things that you, as the mission manager, are most looking forward to seeing the crew go through as they really put hands on that vehicle in flight? Yeah,
so there's the whole training aspect that's going on at JSC. That is training in simulators, and if you remember the movie Apollo 13, all the simulators that they had for Apollo, we have similar type emulators for Artemis, and they'll be getting familiar with the displays and everything. As we get closer, we'll be doing, we do a rollout test. We'll do emergency escape and egress training, sims, that sort of thing. So as we get closer, we'll be doing a lot of sims that the crews will be responsible for, being in position, countdown demonstration tests. We used to do those on shuttle, and we'll do those here too. They're very valuable to get timing and making sure everybody understands where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there.
And then just last question, sort of jumping off of that point, being that this is the first time that this rocket will support a crew, that the Orion spacecraft will fly with humans, how are you thinking about your role as the mission manager, being the person who's first going to put people on this vehicle in this spacecraft? How are you kind of processing all that?
It's my job, so I'm really looking forward to the mission management team training. We'll start that towards the end of this calendar year, putting the team through scenarios, and the ground system guys will be helping us out with that, and the flight ops folks will be helping us out with all that training. So that's really the part that I'm most looking forward to, is getting in, doing our training, and learning from the training.
Well, we look forward to watching the progress between now and a little more than a year from now.
Yeah, very excited.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's good talking with you.
And of course, we have much more to come, as you can see. Well, actually, it may have come out of the shot here, but you can see in the box to my left the progress of the core stage now making its way very quickly, some stops and starts, but of course that's all part of the process, being very methodical with the movement of this vehicle. Much more to come in our live coverage, so stay right here. You're watching the live transport of the SLS core stage here in Spaceflight Now. Our thanks again to Matthew Ramsey for a very well-timed interview. As you can see, the rain has started to fall here at the Kennedy Space Center, so bear with us for a few minutes as we go ahead and put some protective coverings on our cameras to make sure that they stay safe. We'll be back with you with more commentary in just a moment. It's now about 10:50 here on Florida's Space Coast. A little soggier than we were last time we spoke, but of course this is Florida in July, so just about as soon as everyone was just getting all of our camera equipment and such protected, the rain has decided to go away. So it is nothing if not a typical Florida mid-morning here in late July timeframe. Of course, while all of us here covering this would certainly prefer to not gotten soggy, the rocket is certainly well equipped to handle a little bit of rainfall. If you recall, during the Artemis 1 mission campaign, they decided to leave the Artemis 1 vehicle out at the pad as Hurricane Nicole made its way towards Florida, and that rocket weathered the storm just fine. Had a successful launch not too long after. Want to, of course, once again thank Artemis 2 mission manager Matthew Ramsey for his time and insight into what is going to be a very important mission for the Artemis campaign. As we discussed, this will be the first time that NASA astronauts and a Canadian Space Agency astronaut will ride aboard the Orion spacecraft and take this SLS core stage for a trip on up on their way to the moon. This mission will not be the one that sees a landing on the lunar surface, though. That'll come up currently scheduled for the Artemis 3 mission. Some important components of that flight, of course, are the readiness of the spacesuits that are being manufactured and tested by Axiom Space, based in Houston, as well as, of course, the Starship vehicle in its human landing system configuration. That, of course, coming from SpaceX. SpaceX is gearing up for Flight 5 of that rocket in the weeks to come. This will be, if they continue with the mission profile as anticipated, quite an exciting endeavor as they're looking to catch the booster for the very first time. We're now coming up on the top of the hour here on Florida's Space Coast. If you're just joining us, I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now, and welcome to our live coverage here on the rollout of the SLS Space Launch System rocket core stage, making its way towards the building just behind it, the vehicle assembly building here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Just to the right of those 4 RS-25 engines, you can see the helicopter landing pad here adjacent to the press site. A couple of the press buildings from our colleagues at different news outlets are in the foreground of the camera. You can see the core stage there in the center of your screen. Those 4 RS-25 engines will be powered by a combination of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, same as, of course, the first Artemis mission and the successive ones. These particular engines also have some heritage back to the space shuttle days. From the bottom left going around counterclockwise, for those who were not with us when we first talked about them, they are numbered bottom left, number 1, bottom right, number 2, top right, number 3, top left, number 4. That engine in the bottom left-hand corner of this set is the most flight-proven engine out of the bunch. It has flown 15 missions as part of the shuttle program. First flight, that was STS-91 back in June 1998. Its final mission was the final flight of the space shuttle program, STS-135, on July 2011. It also supported the launch of the Destiny Laboratory module to the International Space Station back in 2001. The engine on the bottom right, that is serial number E2059. It has 5 missions that it has flown as part of the shuttle program. It included the final servicing mission for the Hubble Space Telescope. It was back in 2009. It is now officially the top of the hour, and you can see the core stage getting close to making its final turn here, heading into the vehicle assembly building. Taking a look at the live chat, I want to thank our wonderful moderator, Christina Lee, for joining us this afternoon, not only helping out with moderation duties, but gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Always appreciate that generosity, Christina. Good to see you again today. And to Psychonaut69 for also gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Appreciate you for that. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course the ability to watch all of the moments of liftoff in 4K. And also certainly appreciate the about 530 folks who are watching with us live this afternoon. If you're among our audience and haven't already, if you could do us a favor and give this video, this live stream, a like to allow more folks to find their way into our coverage as we continue to roll along, tracking the roll of the core stage Space Launch System rocket. Now about 5 minutes after the hour here, as we're continuing to track the progress of the Space Launch System rocket core stage. You can see all the folks in the lime green or neon green, however you want to term that color. But the safety vests that are walking alongside the vehicle, that is a combination of folks with NASA's Exploration Ground Systems program in partnership with, of course, Jacobs, which is the prime contractor working alongside EGS. And I imagine there are probably a couple of Boeing folks down there as well, as they are the primes who manufacture the core stage. And then just beyond that, you can see a line of NASA employees watching the progress of this vehicle. Of course, the first core stage that will support a crewed flight under the Artemis program. is now 11:11 here on the East Coast, so for all of us East Coasters, go ahead and make a wish as we continue to track the progress of the SLS core stage. You can see making some good progress since we were first live with you starting at 9 o'clock. Just a little more than 2 hours into this rollout here, making its way to the vehicle assembly building. Of course, that large facility to the right. Taking a look at the live chat here. Want to call out Smoking Fox, who says, Bama proud. And for those who may not understand the context for that comment, of course, the core stage assembly, which is done down at the Michoud assembly facility, or the MAF, down there in southeast Louisiana along the Gulf Coast, is managed by Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. And so the Boeing team, the engineers are principally working up in Huntsville very closely with the technicians and the hands-on team down at the MAF, helping to bring together this and future core stages in preparation for, of course, the Artemis II mission, which is currently set to launch no earlier than September 2025. Looking forward to the Artemis III mission, which NASA hopes will be the one that successfully sees crews land back on the surface of the moon using suits from Axiom Space and a lander from SpaceX. The road to Artemis III comes through Artemis II, of course, which will be the first crewed flight test of the Orion spacecraft and the first time that this rocket will send humans on their way to the moon. As you heard from mission manager Matthew Ramsey, the flight will be a nominal 10-day mission, as they're doing some checkouts of the Orion spacecraft in low Earth orbit on day one. If for whatever reason there's an anomaly, they do have the option to bring the crew back if they decide that it is the safest option to do so. But under a nominal flight scenario, they would do their checkouts in low Earth orbit and then begin to make their way out to the moon, do a single pass around our satellite, and then come back for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. And of course, the arrival of the core stage, not the only thing that's happening here in preparation for the Artemis II mission. Of course, there's a lot of work happening with the mobile launcher, as we heard from Matthew Ramsey as well as from John Honeycutt. But also they're continuing the processing work on the solid rocket boosters, the twin solid rocket boosters that will support the mission and provide about 75% of thrust at liftoff. So as we're continuing to watch the progress of the core stage, making its final turn and getting ready to head into the vehicle assembly building, let's go ahead and take a listen back at part of our conversation with a face that will be familiar to some, Doug Hurley, who, of course, was a former NASA astronaut, flew 2 space shuttle missions, including STS-135, the final flight of shuttle. And as many in our audience will likely remember, he was part of the duo that flew the Demo 2 mission, bringing human spaceflight back to U.S. soil using a crewed Dragon spacecraft, which is currently docked to the International Space Station. So here's part of our conversation with Doug Hurley about the progress being made on the solids for Northrop Grumman, the prime manufacturer of those, and the future of these solids. Let's go ahead and listen to part of that conversation.
Certainly the teams were anxious to look over all the data we got back from the boosters. I mean, the burnout was within 0.4 of a second between the two of them. The thrust was almost identical, so that's what you want, twin solid rocket boosters. And so from our perspective, the performance was incredible, so we expect nothing less for Artemis II. No big tweaks to the Artemis II boosters, obviously. You know, we're looking more long-term with BOLE, the Booster Obsolescence and Life Extension Program, where the Artemis 9 boosters will be new boosters. So we run out of shuttle hardware through Artemis 8. And so that test campaign is well underway, and we actually are going to do a static test of the Boeing motor next spring. As far as I understand it, we're going to do a full duration static test of the new booster, so the new design. So some of the significant changes for the new booster is that the cases will be composite. The current cases are steel, obviously shuttle heritage steel cases. We're going to have a electronic thrust vectoring control system, which will be new. We've done some changes with the propellant, and then of course just efficiencies in manufacturing. I don't know how much will go into that particular static test, but a lot of those changes are going to be incorporated, and we're going to see where we are, and then ideally they'll fly on Artemis 9. You know, and the other big advantage is because of the weight savings you get from a composite case, you'll get about 5 metric tons of performance for SLS. So it's pretty significant, and we're very excited about it. I mean, it's been a lot of work so far, and hopefully we've got a successful test next spring.
And again, our thanks to former NASA astronaut Doug Hurley for his time, currently over with Northrop Grumman. He also mentioned in our conversation that they have already completed the solids through Artemis 4 and have begun work on casting the propellant for the Artemis 5 mission. So Northrop Grumman really working out quite a bit ahead of where NASA is, and will be ready to transport those booster segments down here to the Cape when needed. As you're taking a look from this camera vantage point here, nice sort of meshing of two different Boeing enterprises. Of course, the core stage manufactured by Boeing as the prime contractor, but you see there that facility behind with the door that says home of the X-37B. That is an uncrewed space plane that is operated by the U.S. Air Force. Currently, one of those two, they have two of the X-37B space planes. One of them was launched by a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket and is currently in orbit right now. A mission very much under wraps, so not a lot is known about its current flight profile, how long it will spend on orbit, or the full extent of what it will be doing while it's up there. We do know that one of the experiments that is on board the X-37B currently in flight is a SEEDS experiment on behalf of NASA that is studying the effects of radiation on a pretty varied selection of seeds. Just wrapping up on the SEEDS point. This is a statement that we received from Space Force spokesperson back before the launch of the X-37B, noting that the NASA experiment will, quote, continue a Department of Defense partnership with NASA by exposing a collection of seeds to the spaceflight environment. The experiment will expand upon the previous NASA experiments, testing the unique conditions of interplanetary spaceflight by exposing the seeds and materials to the radiation space environment of space. These experiments are vital to understanding how humanity can carry out long-duration manned missions in space and represent a core tenet of the X-37B's mission to provide easier access to space for America's scientists and engineers, end quote. And again, the X-37B also manufactured by Boeing, which is the reason why I was tying those two together. If you're just joining us and wondering why I'm talking about a Space Force, Air Force mission that is currently in progress Reason being, as you can see on the far right-hand corner of this shot on your screen, that blue door says home of the X-37B. That is the site where those vehicles are processed prior to future missions. Last time it flew was on orbit for more than 900 days. We'll see how long this time Space Force has it up there. We're now closing in on the bottom of the hour here, 11:24 Eastern. So we're continuing to track the progress of the SLS core stage. Taking a look at the live chat first off, want to thank the little more than 550 folks who are with us this afternoon. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate if you could give this live stream a like to allow more folks to find their way in to our live coverage. As far as when our next live launch coverage will resume, of course, that is very much in the hands of the Federal Aviation Administration, who is still assessing the SpaceX request for a public safety determination, which would allow them to resume launching the Falcon 9 rocket. We are anticipating a static fire test later on tonight. That'll be one helpful step in gathering more data towards a resumption of launches. Assuming that the FAA does give SpaceX the go-ahead soon, I'll throw out a nebulous soon since don't have exactly a clear picture of how much margin they need, but SpaceX is currently looking at a launch, their return to flight mission being the Starlink 10-4 flight that will lift off from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Peel away from this for just a hair. You can see the Falcon 9 rocket for that mission standing tall over at Pad 40. Again, anticipating a static fire later on this evening in preparation for a launch that would happen just on the other side of midnight. So in the very wee morning hours of Friday morning, with fueling starting late Thursday night. Again, with a giant caveat of that is assuming that the FAA has granted permission for SpaceX to resume launching. Now, as you can see, we're getting close to the conclusion of the progress of the SLS core stage making its way into the vehicle assembly building. It's been just about 2.5 hours since NASA and its folks with the Exploration Ground Systems program based here at the Kennedy Space Center alongside Jacobs, the prime contractor with EGS, and Boeing have been working to get that core stage from the Pegasus barge rolled all the way over here to the VAB. One of the last big road trips for this booster. If all goes according to plan, this will be, of course, the last time this booster really makes a lot of, or covers a lot of ground without some of its other pieces and parts, those being, of course, the two solid rocket boosters that will provide 75% of the thrust at liftoff, as well as the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and of course the Orion spacecraft, which will house the 3 NASA, 1 Canadian Space Agency astronaut as they make their way around the moon and back again. After a roughly 2.5-hour journey, the core stage is just now starting to make its way through the big door here at the vehicle assembly building. With the exception of a little smattering of rain for about 5 or so minutes, it's been a fairly smooth morning for the Exploration Ground Systems folks, bringing the core stage out of the Pegasus barge and over to the VAB. No real hiccups of which to speak. You can see some folks who have been enjoying their time here, trying to catch the best views, and well prepared with what looks like a, not sure if that's a picnic basket with those lawn chairs, but kudos to that duo there for being right and ready for fairly long morning. Was it the battery, Adam? Did it reach 0? Yeah, sorry. To you, did the battery down the reach 0? Okay, copy. Now about quarter to noon here on the East Coast. Of course, as was the case when the core stage was coming out of the Pegasus barge, things do slow down a little bit as it's passing into the vehicle assembly building. Even though there is a fairly healthy space margin on either side of the core stage. When you come into a non-entirely open environment, you want to take a slow and methodical step-through process here, and of course they're not in a rush to get this core stage inside. Fortunately, even though it is a cloudy day, there's not a thunderstorm risk right now, so they are able to take their time with this part of the process. as we are approaching the top of the hour here, almost noontime on the Space Coast. You can see the SLS core stage, which in this configuration is about 212 feet long, has almost completed its journey inside the vehicle assembly building, and not a moment too soon. As take a look at the wide view here, you can see some storm clouds start to roll back in. We had a brief spritz of rain that lasted about 5 or so minutes. Core stage acting as a nice umbrella, though, for the folks with the Exploration Ground Systems program. They were able to, some of them duck underneath the core stage, grab a little shelter, wait for the rain to subside before they continued on. Of course, the aft end, or the bottom end of the rocket with those 4 RS-25 engines, highlighting the engine section here of the core stage vehicle. See part of the bottom barrel. Now about 12:05, just taking a look at the live chat here. One of the folks in the chat, Bruh Button, asks if there are rules about cameras in the vehicle assembly building, noting that it would be nice to see an inside shot. Well, we certainly agree that it would be lovely to see, and we'd love to bring you an interior shot inside the vehicle assembly building. NASA, of course, does have its own cameras that are live, presumably 24-hour cameras inside the vehicle assembly building. However, they are not presently available to the press. Otherwise, we would, of course, be showing that to you right now. Because those are NASA cameras, it is NASA's discretion when it's wanting to share those views with the public. Notably, during the space shuttle era, there were a number of times that those views were made accessible to the press on a number of occasions. However, as Musar notes, much like the ISS, yes, it is, you know, there are a number of cameras inside the space station, and it is at NASA's discretion when those are turned on, when they're turned off, and when those views are shared and how they are shared, whether it is through a live downlink or through a recorded video that is then approved and then sent out through the Public Affairs Office. As far as media bringing cameras inside the vehicle assembly building, there are opportunities for the press to bring our own camera equipment inside, and certainly during the ramp up to the Artemis 1 mission, especially once the vehicle was fully stacked, there were a few opportunities where they brought the press inside to see the full stack. We were able to talk with subject matter experts about various components of the rocket. It was really impressive to see it inside the VAB. I was very fortunate to be one of the members of the press that was allowed inside when the scaffolding was taken away, and you could see the full vehicle at about as close as you can from a high vantage point. I think it was level 15 that we were able to go out and, or go inside, I should say, and see the vehicle itself. And under my previous employment, my former colleague John Chabon and I were able to go up inside the High Tower 3 and get fairly close to the vehicle. Obviously, because of its sensitivity, we're not allowed to bring cell phones or any RF devices, smartwatches, key fobs, all that. We had to leave downstairs. But we were able to go up on the level parallel to the top of the solid rocket boosters, as well as close to the level where the Orion spacecraft was. So hopefully there will be some opportunities for us to do that here at Spaceflight Now, and we look forward to bringing you robust coverage of the progress of the Space Launch System rocket as assembly begins. Of course, the mobile launcher will be brought back in before the stacking process really gets underway. As we heard from our previous conversations, which you can certainly go back and rewatch those, mobile launcher has about a month and some change left on its work out at the pad before it's brought back into the VAB. Musar saying, now you're just trying to make us jealous. No, not trying to make you jealous, just letting you know the different opportunities there are to bring cameras inside and share the story of what's going on inside the VAB. So yeah, we look forward to helping to tell that story as stacking progresses later this year. And as you can see, as the rain begins to fall here once again at the press site, the core stage has made it safely inside the vehicle assembly building. And so we're going to go ahead and wind up our live coverage today. It has been about, a little more than 3 hours since we began, and so we certainly appreciate all of you who have been along with us for the ride, and thanks to Callistia Lee, one of our wonderful moderators, who is marking a member with us at 10 months. Says thanks for the fantastic stream and info, Spaceflight Now team. Always enjoy learning new things from Will and his guests. Well, we certainly appreciate all the help that you provide, Callistia. It's great to have you on the moderation team. And you can see here in this wide shot, not quite as rainy from this vantage point, but you can see the journey that the core stage has made from the Pegasus barge on the right to the VAB on the left, and eventually it'll make a journey out to the heart of what you see on your screen out at Launch Complex 39B, where the mobile launcher is located and where the rocket will take off with 4 astronauts on board come September 2025 or shortly thereafter. So I want to thank our photographer Adam Bernstein, who's been running all around this place between our tracking cameras and doing some still photography as well. I want to thank our editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast, also getting his steps in, changing some of the camera views and making sure that things stayed safe from the rain as it began to fall. And you can see just the last little tips of the RS-25 engines as they continue to crawl their way into the vehicle assembly building. We'll leave you with one last look inside from this vantage point as we say farewell for now. And of course, we'll be back with you for live static fire coverage later on this evening, assuming things remain on track with SpaceX and its plans to static fire this Falcon 9 rocket standing ready and waiting over at Pad 40 over Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. SpaceX hopes to make its return to flight with the Falcon 9 rocket soon, once it gets approval from the Federal Aviation Administration, which oversees commercial spaceflight. I want to thank all of our channel members who help make this possible to do live, robust coverage as we do here at Spaceflight Now. And to all of us, or of all of you in the audience, it's been a long morning. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. Until then, bye-bye.